Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom, and I'm your weekly horoscope columnist here on Astrology Hub. And that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. Did you know that you could get my free weekly horoscopes sent directly to your inbox every week? Just go to www.astrologyhub.com/horoscope to sign up and start receiving yours today. Saturn and Pluto have a lot in common in astrology. Both planets are described as dark and gloomy. Both planets are known for being taciturn and hard to read. And both planets are connected to tests and ordeals. Indeed, before Pluto was discovered in 1930, it was Saturn who ruled over the underworld with its deep mines and precious metals. Saturn who ruled over endings, and Saturn who ruled over death, as evidenced by the countless depictions of Father Time wielding a scythe, that then becomes a skeleton wielding a scythe, known as the Grim Reaper, in Europe in the 14th century during the Black Death. In 1930, Pluto became the outermost planet, replacing Saturn as the coldest, slowest, and the most distant of all the planets in astrology. Yet, unlike Saturn, it was Pluto who took on the attributes of death and rebirth, something that had never been associated with Saturn. Discovered at the midpoint between the beginning of World War I and the end of the Second World War, Pluto symbolized the wholesale destruction of the old order and the beginning of the new, hence death and rebirth. Pluto's discovery also heralded the dawn of the atomic age, putting into our hands the means to either destroy the world we live in or to nurture it. No more blaming fate or God or destiny. The future of the planet, for better or worse, lies with us. Now, the idea that we're all in it together is probably the best way to think of Pluto in Aquarius. Pluto is the planet of ordeals and the transformations that arise from them. And Aquarius is the zodiac sign of the collective. It believes that society is only as good as the people in it. So the ordeal part of Pluto in Aquarius is in trying to get people on board with what you think would make the world a better place. And the transformative part of Pluto in Aquarius talks about the interactions in our daily life that either help or hinder that process. Now, I would like to share with you a quote that comes from Shakespeare. Actually, it comes from the play Julius Caesar, Act 1, Scene 2. And it's Cassius talking to Brutus. And Cassius says, "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves." And that's a pretty well-known quote, and it says a lot. It says, don't blame outside circumstances for the faults that you experience in your life. Either blame yourself or reflect upon yourself and see what's going on there. Don't look at the stars, look at yourself. You're in charge of your own life. But that's not the whole quote. The whole quote is, "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings." And that, to me, really changes the quote. Okay, it makes it a rather amazing quote, because either Cassius is saying the fault is in us because we are underlings, or the fault is in our belief that we are underlings and are subsequently unable to change the course of events in our lives, when in fact we can. So this emphasis going from the stars to ourselves, but ourselves, the fault being in our belief that we are underlings, really speaks to me of this very unique relationship that's going on in the stars right now between Saturn and Pluto. Pluto can carry with it a sort of inevitability. It's known as the dark planet, the unknown planet. It's connected to, as I said before, death and rebirth, and because of its slow progress through the signs, it can spend anywhere from 12 to 32 years in just one zodiac sign. You can see why Pluto would carry with it a sort of inevitability. You can't really argue with Pluto. Where Saturn is different, especially because Saturn is in the zodiac sign of Aries, Saturn speaks about flaws. And when it's in the zodiac sign of Aries, it speaks about the flawed person. Okay, so it speaks about the fact that we are not perfect, that we are not the best that we can always be 24/7, that we have certain flaws, we have certain faults that exist within our person. And it can bring, particularly with Saturn in the zodiac sign of Aries, this idea of I don't matter. Okay, and here you can almost sort of see the idea of the underling coming forth. Like if I'm facing the inevitability of a Plutonian energy and I feel flawed as a person, either my flaws are going to come out and trip me up, or I'm going to be faced with challenges in life that are just too big for me. They're too overwhelming, and I can't stop the course of events and I can't change the course of events. So I basically don't matter. Now, this probably sounds a little bit like a bummer. We're talking about Pluto and Saturn here, and Pluto and Saturn can be pretty heavy. Saturn is the idea of ordeals and the transformations that arise from them, and Saturn is the planet of tests, trials, and tribulations. Both of them will emphasize the darker parts of our nature, pretty much the parts of our nature that we're not particularly comfortable with. Pluto can bring out a sense of mortality and fear of mortality, along with a sort of obsessive quality. And then Saturn can bring out a feeling of helplessness, or I'm not up to the task at hand. I'm not up to the test that I'm facing, and I might as well throw up my hands and give up because it's just too much. Now, typically, if we were just talking about Pluto and Saturn by transit in the sky, they would probably exacerbate those worries and anxieties. They might even exacerbate that feeling of paralysis, but not when they're forming a sextile. The sextile between Saturn and Pluto changes the dispositions of the planets. I mean, they're still going to be heavy, okay, and they're still going to make you ask big questions about life and things like that. But instead of thwarting you, or instead of paralyzing you, these two planets, because of their sextile, are going to help you, especially since Saturn in the zodiac sign of Aries rules Pluto in the zodiac sign of Aquarius. Basically, what that means is that they're in communication there. They're in conversation, because that's what a sextile is. Pluto isn't unapproachable and remote. In fact, he's going to communicate to Saturn, and Saturn is not going to be as defensive or isolated. It's going to be sort of open to what Pluto has to say. But the other thing that you have to keep in mind with these two planets, even though their disposition has changed regarding you because of the sextile, their character hasn't. All right. So these two planets, Saturn and Pluto, are not benefics. Okay. They're not Venus or Jupiter or even the sun. Okay. So don't expect a helping hand here, and don't expect a lucky break. What is going to happen during this period of time of their sextile is that you are going to have to draw upon your own resources. You are going to have to draw upon strengths you didn't know you had. And it won't be easy wrestling with this sense of fear every step of the way, but that's what Saturn is here for. Saturn is here for you to work with your fears and anxieties, not to be imprisoned by them, not to be incarcerated by them, not to be dominated by them, but to engage in some sort of conversation with them, to engage in some kind of realization or even enlightenment. Now, we often think of Saturn as being a negative in astrology. Okay, this is the planet of test, trials, and tribulations. This is a planet that withholds the things that we want and that we are pursuing. This is the planet that throws up obstacles in our path. And this is a planet that, particularly when it's traveling through our sign, weighs us down with heavy obligations and responsibilities. But what I like to remember about Saturn is that in Roman mythology, Saturn was the god of farming. And it was after Saturn was exiled from Olympus and basically left to wander on planet Earth that Saturn taught mankind how to farm. Saturn taught people how to live in this world. And Saturn still teaches people how to live in this world where everything ultimately falls apart. I mean, if we got up every morning and we, faced that existential reality that we're living in a world where everything falls apart, it would be really difficult to get up out of bed in the morning. But we have things to do. We have places to go. We have responsibilities and obligations to other people and to ourselves. There are things that we want to build and shape and create in our life. And all of these things, this sense of almost really being duty-bound to these activities, are all relegated to the rulership of Saturn. So if you're born under Aries, or you have Aries rising, with Saturn forming a sextile to Pluto in Aquarius, Saturn appears in your zodiac sign. It appears in the zodiac sign of Aries. So you're going to be feeling Saturn the most powerfully. You're going to identify with this idea of being flawed, okay? You're going to feel that you are carrying tremendous responsibilities or obligations in your life, and you're going to be questioning on a very deep level, am I up to the task at hand? Am I even capable of doing the things that I want to do in my life? Now, again, if that Saturn were isolated, if there were no planet that was aspecting it in a benevolent way, like through a trine or a sextile, you probably would be sitting alone in the corner of the room somewhere saying, I am not up to this. I am a fraud. I am an imposter. I don't have the ability to go beyond this. I'm nothing but, not only am I a flawed human being, I'm a failed human being. I mean, Saturn can really, lean in heavily in a zodiac sign like Aries. And because Aries is ruled by Mars, there could be a kind of self-punishment or self-chastisement that could take place that can render you immobile. It could, you're so full of self-criticism that you can't do anything right, and so you don't do anything. What happens as a result of this, with Pluto in the zodiac sign of Aquarius, Pluto in the zodiac sign of Aquarius becomes an enlightening figure. Okay, so Pluto almost enters into a conversation with Saturn along the lines of what's to be gained by getting down on yourself. If you're going to get down on yourself, how are you going to accomplish anything? How can you ever hope to accomplish anything? In fact, your attitude of getting down on yourself might be the thing you need to remove or at least get around. That's the thing that's hindering your progress in your life. It's not always easy for us to see our self-sabotaging patterns. It's not always easy for us to see how we can get in our own way, particularly when Saturn is in our own zodiac sign. But what's lovely about this sextile with Pluto is that you can see how you're getting in your own way. And the two planets, because they can be heavy and hard-hitting, have a little bit of a come to Jesus moment, okay, about the two of them. They're going to state the facts to you. They're going to state the case. And indeed, they're going to kind of pierce through the guilt or self-blame or self-criticism, and they're going to talk to you planet to person, and it's going to be along the lines of you can either continue blaming or getting down on yourself or saying you can't do this, or you can start to look for ways that you can. You can start to trust your ingenuity. You can start to trust your inventiveness. You can even perhaps reach out to other people for help or for guidance in some sort of way. Things that aren't ideas that naturally come to Aries, because Aries has a tendency to, really say, I have to do it on my own or by myself. They never really think of asking someone else for help, particularly when they're feeling vulnerable. But Pluto, which is sextiling your Saturn in Aries, is an Aquarius, and it's a very people-person type of sign. So the idea of turning to other people, for help or assistance or even to share with them how you're getting down on yourself. And they might say, wow, you're really getting down on yourself. And are you sure that's like really constructive? This might be very helpful in moving this obstacle that is in your path, this obstacle of self-recrimination or self-criticism. And what you may find as a result of this sextile between Saturn and Pluto is not only are you willing, but you're also able. Now, if you're born under Taurus or you have Taurus rising, Pluto in the zodiac sign of Aquarius appears in your solar midheaven. What that means is your expectations are high, and with Saturn in Aries in that part of your chart that's associated with the 12th house, then your confidence in yourself is low. All right, so you have Pluto at the top of the chart with high expectations, and then Saturn in a very sensitive area of your chart, feeling very insecure and not very confident. And moreover, maybe even feeling isolated or like you're on a slippery slope or you don't have a firm grounding in your situation. You might even be feeling these days like you are the underling that Cassius was telling Brutus about, that, it's your fault that you're an underling and not, rising to the occasion of these high expectations that you have of yourself. Now, high expectations can be good. They can be absolutely wonderful as long as they are promoting some kind of action. They can do that through inspiration. They can do that through aspiration. They can do that through, I'm going to power through, and I did 50 push-ups yesterday and today I'm going to do 75, you push yourself. Okay, in those regards, high expectations can be really wonderful. They can be very constructive. They can become empowering, okay? But if the expectations feel beyond you, okay, if you feel like they're too abstract, maybe too far in the future, or you're asking too much of where you are in your current headspace or your current emotional space, then those high expectations aren't doing any good for you at all. In fact, they're probably making you feel depressed, okay, or like you can't possibly get to that place. So what's really important here is to bring the focus back to yourself. The wonderful thing about Aquarius is that it can get you to see things in the big picture, and to maybe even see that you're not alone, that you're one of many people in society or in their efforts to, realize their great expectations. But the downside to Aquarius is that it can be too removed. It can be too aloof. You're so lost in the big picture of great expectations that you have no idea of how you're supposed to get there or to even realize them. And this is where it's very important to remember that as a Taurus, you were born under the planet Venus. Venus is indeed your ruling planet. And Venus is all about doing things in pairs, okay? Or doing things as even a group, all right? So in other words, the message of Venus here, and you may even know this as a Taurus, is you don't do very well on your own, okay? And that you do best when you're with other people, okay? You do best when you're matched up with someone, like maybe in a relationship or a creative collaboration or some sort of business association. You do well when you're bouncing ideas off of each other. But sometimes as a Taurus, and particularly these days, because of Saturn's placement, too much time alone or retreating into a corner may have a tendency to depress you. It may have a tendency to make you feel very leaden, very heavy, very inert. And so, it can basically reinforce those feelings of being helpless, of being overwhelmed by the expectations that you have. You may see your expectations as a ship that is sailing away from you and you miss the boat, something along those lines. So if you can turn to other people, okay, and it doesn't have to be treating like that person like they're a life preserver or anything like that, but turning to other people and maybe sharing your anxieties or your thoughts about the world or something along those lines and in some kind of conversation. because a sextile is a conversational aspect that takes place between two planets. These are where two planets are kind of like sitting on the steps of a Roman pavilion, and they're talking to one another in the middle of the afternoon. They're just having a very casual conversation that might go deeper, but it's not something that's confrontational. It's not something that's just like so profound that you're struck speechless. You're tossing out ideas. You're seeing where the other planet stands. So if you can bring this conversational energy into your life, so that you see yourself as not being alone or overly burdened with what these expectations are. And what can also help is to talk to people who might say, wow, that's a really heavy expectation. World peace tomorrow. I don't know if you can make that deadline, Taurus. It's like kind of like, it's great to have that expectation maybe as an aspiration, but I don't think you're personally responsible for bringing world peace tomorrow at 1:45 in the afternoon, And that kind of perspective and that kind of humor and that kind of just, sharing those ideas and feeling what the other person says and maybe talking your way through something or articulating, these are things that are beneficial. These are things that are very positive right now. If we can have less withdrawing and going off by yourself and more being there with others and for others, this is going to engage you in the world. This is going to engage you in other perspectives and other points of view that aren't your own. And they might be points of view that you agree with, or they might be points of view that you don't agree with. But when you're in a conversation with someone face to face rather than online, the way that you negotiate disagreements or differences of opinion are very different. And they're, often negotiated with humor or changing the subject or taking the intensity out of it, or, people just don't suddenly like, I'm going to stop talking to, there's a flow of conversation. So they're working with one another. And this idea of working with another person in terms of this flow of conversation and this exchange of ideas, I see this as having an enormously transformative effect on you. First of all, you'll feel less isolated. And second of all, you might find yourself coming up with different ways of looking at a situation, a different perspective, a fresh insight. And this can only be positive and beneficial for you. If you're born into Gemini or you have Gemini rising, this Saturn-Pluto sextile taking place on March 28th is going to be wonderful for you. It's going to be wonderful for you because it involves planets in signs of elements that are complementary to one another. Saturn is in Aries, which is a fire sign, and Pluto is in Aquarius, which is an air sign. And the two signs sextile one another. They get one another. Now, it's not like a trine where it's like, I get you too. I'm totally in your corner. I'm in your corner too. Okay, it's not a trine, which is unconditional support. You do you, babe. I'm right behind you. That's a trine. Okay, a sextile is like, I want to be in your corner, and I really like believe in what you're doing, but isn't there like a better way that we could go about this? Or did you ever think of maybe trying this? Or did you ever sort of consider maybe reaching out and talking to that person instead of like not talking to them? Okay, so what happens with the sextile is that there's a conversation that takes place. Sextiles are lovely, wonderful aspects in astrology. I love sextiles. When I was learning astrology, I was like, sextile? I mean, it just sort of struck me as the poor man's trine, okay, or a wannabe trine. But sextiles are so much more than that because they're really about this conversation that takes place that never really gets nasty, okay, that is constructive, but each planet is going to stand for what they stand for at the same time, okay? So there can be agreement, there could be disagreement, but nothing's going to like call the whole thing off. So what happens here when you're born into Gemini or you have Gemini rising, your sign Gemini forms a natural sextile to Aries, okay? And it forms a natural trine to Pluto, which is in Aquarius, which is an air sign like you. So what's going on here is that your ideas, your words, your speech, your notions, what you have to say are being borne aloft. Okay, a wonderful image for fire and air sextile is a hot air balloon. You know, you step onto one of those gondolas. You see them flying around in New Mexico and places like that. You step into a gondola and they open up the flame. The flame sends hot air into the balloon, and the balloon lifts. It goes aloft. You get a bird's eye view. You're struck by the wonder of your height and of your horizons. This is the wonderful thing that takes place with air and fire sextiles. Okay, you are born aloft and you get a wider perspective and view of the world, and there's a sense of just being above it all, and just like the wonder and the beauty of it all, and for seeing miles and miles and miles and miles. So this is a beautiful idea, especially, and a very appealing one, by the way, for air and fire signs, because it's just kind of like, you know, I'm full of this enthusiasm, and these ideas are very lofty, but I can see them, and they're inspiring me, and this is a really wonderful feeling, especially when I can sit down with other people and inspire them, you know, or get them to think of something differently, and watch an aha moment take place, or maybe they scowl and go like, well, I don't know, but maybe I'm going to have to think about that. You know, so there's this really lovely conversational quality that becomes even more conversational with the fire and the air sextile. But what could be going on right now with this energy is that you could have very big ideas, you know, about what you want to do, about what you can do, about how the world should be. Okay, I mean, we're dealing with Pluto in Aquarius, and Aquarius is a utopian sign. Okay, and what I mean by a utopian sign is that Aquarians can have a very strong idea of how the world should work. Okay, and one of the ideas that an Aquarius can have about how the world should work is that everyone should be heard and listened to. You know, that it's not just one person in charge, but that there's a collective voice, which isn't homogenous. It has different pitches, different tones, different accents, different things to say, and that we have to take in all of these things, all right? So Aquarius has a big picture view, and it wants to listen to all these ideas of all these people, and it wants to serve all of that, and it believes that that's what society should be, okay? How to serve and bring people together for the good of society and the good of themselves as well. But when we're dealing with a planet like Pluto in Aquarius, it can take on a little bit more of a strong arm tone. Okay, and that's because Pluto doesn't do things lightly. Pluto, basically, being named after the Roman god of the underworld, has great gravity. Okay, and it has great weight. All right, so Pluto can have a tendency to be very intense about things or very absolute about things, particularly when Pluto is in a fixed zodiac sign. So Pluto in Aquarius can be a little bit ideological. Pluto in Aquarius can even sort of lend itself to a sort of totalitarian view. And I'm not just throwing out these monosyllabic words, you know, just to throw them on out there. What I mean is when you combine the idea of utopia, which is a perfect society, well, society is ruled by rules and laws and codes of ethics and protocol. You know, the way that you behave in a society. You don't just go and do your own thing and have everyone else doing their own thing. You have good manners, you have rules, you have laws, you have guidelines, you have guardrails, you know, things that really direct the behavior so people can coordinate, they can cooperate, they can relate to one another and not trample over one another. One of those ideas, particularly in the 20th century, would be totalitarian societies in which it's like, I've got a blueprint for society and setting it up like this, you have to sign on. And if you're not signing on, I'm kicking you out of the society. So that can be utopian in a sort of heavy-handed way. But if we bring this back to the idea of big ideas, you know, that as a Gemini, you might have these very big ideas of what you want to do and what your goals are, okay? And you might find in your behavior recently that there's a bit of a insistent quality that's crept in, a bit of a persistent quality that's crept in. If someone disagrees with you, you might be, why? Okay, now before it might have been like someone disagrees and you're like, oh, that's interesting. Why? Nowadays it might be like, why? 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 Okay, so it might, you might want to sort of see if that's kind of crept into the interactions at all. And that's just what Pluto does. Okay, Pluto just wants to get to the point, which is not typically Gemini, because Gemini likes working with variables and options. So the Pluto in Aquarius might have brought on more of an insistent way of this is how it should be done. And what you might be seeing right now is that, people might be good humored about it, but some people might not, and some people might be kind of feeling a little bit alienated or in some way, or, you've gotten a little pushy lately or something along those lines. And what you might begin to see here is that there's a bit more of an edge to the way that you present things. And you might be beginning to understand here that if you have these big ideas and goals that you want to reach, you're not going to be able to do it unless you bring other people back on board with it. And that doesn't mean winning the argument or prevailing in the debate. What it means is sort of getting back down into that Gemini quality again. Aquarians can get very sort of big picture and they can tend towards the absolute. The beauty of Gemini as an air sign is that it's going to break things down into one-on-one conversations. It's like, we're going to have this one-on-one conversation, and then me and Hortense are going to have a one-on-one conversation. And there's Larry, and we're going to have a one-on-one conversation. And then Gemini connects them. Did you hear what Hortense had to think about? And then Larry said this about Hortense. Okay. So Gemini has this connect the dots, one-on-one conversational ability, which is really great. And sometimes it can maybe play one person off the other. Sorry, Gemini, but sometimes it could do that. But on the other hand, the flip side of that is by communicating between the different parties who may or may not be talking to each other yet or aren't on the same page, there's this idea of involving people, getting people to participate. So if you can sort of change the tone from winning people over to the way you think that things should be done to, this would be good for you. And then they're like, why would it be good for me? And you could be like, it's good for you for X, Y, and Z. And then the person's like, well, I like X, I don't like Y, maybe Z. And then sextile, you have this conversation that's going on. And so a wonderful thing that can occur as a result of this is not only do you win cooperation, but you may also find yourself listening to what people have to say and taking into account their perspective or their point of view of a situation and becoming enriched by that. Like they gave you information you didn't have before. They got you thinking of things that you didn't think of before, or asking questions you didn't ask before, maybe just being reflective, like maybe you haven't been in a little while. But this could be the wonderful thing about the sextile between the Saturn and the Pluto. Saturn's always going to want to know, how are we going to make this happen? How are we going to make these big ideas happen? And the answer with the sextile is by winning over people's cooperation, not by telling them what to do, but winning over their cooperation by sort of getting to know them again and being interested in their perspectives and their opinions again and really listening. And the more that you do that, the more that you'll see that your big idea sells itself, rather than for you having to sort of push a hard sell in the first place. If you're born under Cancer or you have Cancer rising, then this sextile taking place between Saturn and Pluto on March 28th is going to be really interesting for you, okay? It's funny, I was actually going to start in one direction and I stopped and I'm heading in this other direction because it is going to be really interesting for you. What I'm finding fascinating about the slower moving planets moving into air and fire signs and its effect on people born under earth and water signs is I thought at first like that was just going to be really hard. Okay, you're doing an elemental shift there. I mean, you're coming out of a period of time in which the earth and the water was very much in your corner of the horoscope, and you're moving into a period of time in which your earth and wateriness, in your case as a Cancer rising, your water element isn't altogether comfortable with fire and with air. And so one would think that this would be difficult, that this would be, talk about obstacles. This is an obstacle. But what I'm finding with people born under Cancer or Cancer rising is that it's not the big obstacle that one might have imagined it would be at first. I don't know whether some of that is like, Pluto was in your opposite sign since 2008, 2009, which might as well have been the beginning of time. But I think in some ways that's inured you, if that's the right word. It's acclimated you. It's gotten you used to the idea of dealing with things that don't come easily. And also it's gotten you used to the idea of stepping up to the plate. Now, you might still be having some issues around stepping up to the plate, but that's what Saturn at the top of your solar horoscope is here for. That's what Saturn is here to do. Saturn is saying, you are up to this. You can do this. And that can change on a daily basis. When you're born under Cancer, you have Cancer rising. There's some days in which you're like, I am up to this. I can do this. I can do it. Let's do it, and then there are going to be days in which it's like, I am not up to this. I can't do this. I just want to go back to the corner. I just, don't make me do this. Okay. So, and you're going to have days like that. But Saturn in Aries, and Aries, remember, in astrology is the zodiac sign of Coach Dad. Okay. Saturn in Aries is saying, okay, I know you want to jump out of the pool, but just let's stand here in the shallow end. And let's just take a moment to sort of get used to the idea of being in water. Or Saturn might be holding up the bike and it says, let's just do the pedaling like this. Saturn's going to say, you can do this, but it's going to take on a sort of, let's do it at your pace. Let's get used to how this is going to be done. Now, if Saturn had been by itself here at the top of the chart, it would have been much more severe and it would have been heavier. But it's the sextile to Pluto in Aquarius that has changed the disposition of Saturn. It's not as stern and it's not as severe, all right? It actually wants to communicate to you. Why does it want to communicate to you? Because it wants you to win. It wants you to do better. It wants you to become the best that you can be. And this is a moment where Saturn makes a switch, because if it's sextile to Pluto, Saturn makes a switch from a scolding figure or a disciplinarian figure to really being interested in how you're understanding what it's trying to teach. Am I going too fast? Am I being too demanding? Is this too much for you today? And if it's too much for you today, instead of you saying, I'll never be able to do it, let's try again tomorrow. Okay, so Saturn in Aries isn't being as insistent and as urgent as Aries would naturally be, and it's not being as severe or heavy as Saturn would naturally be because of this sextile to Pluto. So what Pluto's doing is that because it's in Aquarius, and Aquarius can be about discovering other ways. If you're not understanding what I'm saying from this, I'm going to change the way that I'm talking and see if I bring up a different example, if you would understand it from a different point of view. Or maybe I'm going to move on to something that's similar and share that idea to see if that gets the idea across. The air signs are pretty good at that, okay? And when there's a sextile going on, there's a conversational quality. There's more of an impulse to experiment and maybe even to play. Let's try this idea. Let's try that idea. Let's try another way. It's not just going to repeat over and over and over again, not with a sextile. Squares, they would be repeating their positions over and over again, until one of you gave up. Okay. But with the sextile, it's conversational. And so you may feel like you've stepped into a position of responsibility or leadership, or you're in charge of the school play, like Charlie Brown, or whatever the situation would be, whatever the context, you're pretty much in charge. And people are looking to you to take charge. And as a Cancer, you might feel like, at first, because the water signs have this thing about being exposed and then expectations being dumped on top of it. Like, hey, it's all on you. And now we expect you to come through, and water signs would be like, ooh, that's their first response. But I think that what you're finding by taking on this position of responsibility is that you're good at it. And this is where I wanted to bring in that element that I was talking about earlier. By itself, with Aquarius and Aries, there's a tendency towards not personalizing things, okay? Aquarius is already like, let's not personalize this. Let's make this professional, or this is a mathematical situation, or let's talk figures, not feelings. Aquarius is really into not personalizing things because it doesn't want the feelings and the panic and the reactions to muddy the waters. Aquarians really want clear thinking. They really want clear speaking. Okay. And then when you add that to an Aries energy, Aries doesn't want to personalize things because personalizing things is weak. If you personalize something, that means your feelings were hurt, and Aries is like, you never show if your feelings are hurt ever, because Aries is always afraid of like, did I hurt your feelings? And they're like, no, so it's like, you didn't hurt my feelings. And so that's a tendency here to not make things personal. But with this sextile, it's going to find a way to work with your Cancerian energy. And the beauty of your Cancerian energy is that you do take things personally. You take into account what someone's feelings might be. You take into account what someone's reaction might be. You take into account what that person's going through that day. You take into account maybe something the person shared with you, or their own personal history, or something along those lines. And what can happen here when it mixes with this air and fire energy is that you can have a way of being sensitive and personal, but without it getting too personal, or too intimate. In other words, you can express a sympathy for what the person's going through, but at the same time, you'll remind them that they still have a deadline, or they still have something that they need to do. And so this might be something that you're discovering, that by being in a leadership position or a position of responsibility, that you can be personal and impersonal at the same time. You can show that you're on that person's side and that you want them to succeed, but they still have an obligation to finish a project, to produce a result, to show up when they said that they were going to show up. And I think that this quality of reminding them of this in a caring way, but not a lenient way, it's going to become a strength that you become more comfortable exercising. It's going to be something that makes you feel more secure in what it is that you're doing. And of course, the more secure and comfortable you become in what it is that you're doing, the more that people are going to respect and follow your leadership. If you're born under Leo, or you have Leo rising, you're not the best at understanding another person's point of view when you're in a relationship with them. It could be a romantic relationship, a professional relationship, a creative collaboration. It's not always easy for you to understand their point of view if it is opposite you. For instance, let's say you want to do something and the other person doesn't. Being a fixed sign, you're going to stand for what you want to do, and the other person is going to stand for what they don't want to do. And what I'm basically invoking here is Pluto being opposite your zodiac sign in Aquarius. When you have Pluto opposite your zodiac sign in Aquarius, then Pluto is a very, very strong planet in a very fixed sign, a sign that's absolutely as fixed as yours. And it's interesting because Pluto and the sun have a very interesting relationship with one another. The sun is at the center of our solar system, right? And Pluto is at the furthest distance away from the center of our solar system. So the sun is very here, and then Pluto is very remote. It's very far away. Another thing that they have in common, which also shows up in astrological symbolism, is that the sun is pretty much the ego, the identity, the thing that you recognize about yourself to be true. Pluto is as infused in your identity. It anchors your identity. It is who you are, but on a very fundamental level, okay? On a level that maybe you don't see and that you don't recognize. So the sun will be the person you see and everyone else sees, or you want to be seen, the sun in the sky, daytime, and Pluto doesn't want to be seen. It's unseen, but yet it's the gravitational pull that holds everything in place. I liken this to the fact that, I discovered a little while ago that the temperature of the molten core of our planet, the center of our world, journey to the center of the earth, right, is like a sun. Okay, it's a molten lava core, and the temperature of that core is the same temperature as the surface of the sun. So I will often, talk about Pluto and the sun as being paired or really more opposite one another, in terms of the strength of your identity. There's the identity that you recognize about yourself to be true. And then there's what Dane Rudhyar called the seed self. It's the deep part of yourself that sprouted as a seed and, sent out its roots, and it craned its stem up to the soil so it could find the sun, and it grows and it thrives. I mean, when we look at trees and bushes and flowers, they're not just like trees, bushes, and flowers that have been like staked into the ground. They're held by roots that draw upon the underground world. And so this is kind of how Pluto can be. Probably the easiest way to understand it is your grit, your gut self. So there's the self that wants to be recognized and is recognized or isn't recognized. And then there's the grit, the gut self, the instinctual self, and that's the Pluto. So when you have Pluto opposite your sun, there can be a feeling like maybe it's other people and not you who are holding the strength position in your life. Okay. Maybe people are coming into your life with demands, and how do you react to those demands? How do you negotiate to those demands? Do you cave in under them, or do you refuse to back down? Do you become defensive? Do you say, I didn't do that, you did that, something along those lines? And that can happen in an opposition. In an opposition, which my favorite metaphor for it is our United States Congress, okay, with the two parties, Republican, Democrat, there's no cooperation at all. They're not even fighting. They're just like having nothing to do with each other. That can be an opposition. The Pluto becomes an opposite thing. And so there can be this feeling in your life right now of maybe feeling out of sync in your relationship, out of sync with the relationships that populate your life, that the people that you're with, you feel okay for a while, but then you sort of feel out of sync again, or like you're not getting each other. And that can just be with the friends that you're hanging out with, or your colleagues, or it could even be with your spouse or business partner, that, it can be a feeling of like, I just don't feel in sync with this person at all right now. And I don't know if we're on the same page, and I don't know if we're going to continue to be on the same page. And do I have to do something about that? Now, the beauty of Saturn being in Aries is that Aries is a fire sign, just like Leo. Leo's a fire sign. And so that creates a trine. And what also happens here is that the Saturn forms a sextile to Pluto and Aquarius. That's because Aquarius is in an air sign, Saturn is in a fire sign, and air and fire complement one another as elements. They get each other. It's not a trine like Aries and Leo, but it's conversational, which is the nature of a sextile. These are two zodiac signs that talk to one another and they get each other. They're not going to agree on everything, but they can have an exchange of ideas. They can share opinions. They can maybe have different points of view. And that's not going to stop their conversation. If anything, it's going to deepen it or maybe even excite it. So with this Saturn and Aries forming a sextile to Pluto, you may find yourself during this period of time suddenly getting insight into the other person's position, okay? That if you're feeling out of sync, maybe they're feeling out of sync in some way. And maybe they've been trying to communicate that, and maybe you haven't really been hearing it any more than you've been trying to communicate it, and they haven't been hearing it. Okay, so that Saturn in Aries can almost act like a mediator, and maybe you are, for all I know, involved in mediation right now, but but that Saturn in Aries can act as a mediator. Where the Saturn in Aries gets you, you don't have to explain yourself to Saturn in Aries. It gets you in an instant, okay? But then the Saturn in Aries is able to communicate to that Pluto and Aquarius energy where you're coming from and what's important to you. And Pluto and Aquarius can communicate to Saturn because the Saturn rules the Pluto in Aquarius. Pluto and Aquarius can communicate to the Saturn, well, this is where I'm coming from. Is there any way that you could make this understandable to the other person? And Saturn in Aries is going to be like, sure, no, I can go ahead and do that. So you might be involved in a mediation right now, or on a metaphorical level, the Saturn in Aries is acting as a mediator, where suddenly, maybe you had a conversation with an old friend, or the person that you were having issues with had a conversation with a very experienced relative who's been through what they've been through before and can talk to them, in a very candid way. But anyway, that you've been touching base with other sources or other people, and it's helping to shape your conversation. It's helping to create a conversation between the two of you, that you're moving from, by having a mediating figure, you're moving from a polar opposites position, to a willingness to listen to one another. And maybe you need a third party involved, or maybe because a third party got involved, that they set up the situation where you can talk to one another. Another thing that might be going on during this period of time is that there might be a role reversal that's taking place in a relationship or collaboration or partnership. For instance, if you were the breadwinner, then maybe the other person's becoming the breadwinner. Or if you were the person who was dependent on the person, you're now becoming the breadwinner. There's a role reversal, which kind of sounds good in the sense of like, well, now the shoe's on the other foot, or now you know what it's like to be in this position. The person's like, wow, I didn't really understand things until I had to do this, or wasn't able to do this. Okay. But it also can change the balance of power in a way. And so that takes some getting used to. If you're the breadwinner and you're suddenly not the breadwinner, you might feel very beholden in a way that you didn't feel before. You don't like that. Or if you go from the person who was dependent or relied upon someone else and now you're the breadwinner, you might be exercising authority in a way that's very different for you. You might not be comfortable with exercising authority, or maybe your partner is questioning you because they used to have that position and they know better than you do. So these might be things that are going on, these changes in your relationships, professional, creative, familial, and even spousal. These may be things that are taking place. But what I want you to keep in mind is that instead of trying to go back to the old roles that felt safe and comfortable, get into the experimental flavor of a Pluto and Aquarius. Look for things that you can do differently, or, try things on your own, become more experimental, maybe even playful. And you might find that this role reversal becomes a more enlightening experience instead of a competitive one. If you're born under Virgo or you have Virgo rising, this sextile that's taking place between Saturn and Pluto on March 28th, it's going to be a little awkward for you to try to understand. Okay, the reason for this is because both the Saturn and the Pluto are in zodiac signs that form a quincunx to yours. Okay, Virgo forms a quincunx to Aries, and Virgo also forms a quincunx to Aquarius. Okay, and I've just listed two signs that do not conjoin yours, they do not oppose yours, they do not square, trine, or sextile. These are the Ptolemaic aspects. These are the normal ways that the planets communicate with one another. When you have something which is called a quincunx, which is what these two planets are doing to your sign, then you have this thing where you're not really quite getting one another, despite best attempts to be clear. Okay. And so the energy isn't coherent. It's not making sense. What amplifies this is that because you've got planets that are sextiling one another and they're both quincunxing you, that creates a yod in astrology. All right. And a yod is very interesting. It's kind of referred to as the finger of God. Okay. And so that sounds very faded, and that sounds very, very larger than life. But what's hard to discern when you're involved in a yacht, and in your case, you're the apex of it. Both planets in these signs are forming quincunxes to you, so you're the apex of this triangle. Is that you can't tell if the finger of God is pointing the way or if the finger of God is flipping you off. Okay, so this is the thing that you're trying to figure out here. What makes a yacht different from a trine is that they're two very different triangles. A trine is going to ultimately be expressed as a grand trine, where you've got a planet in each of three signs that triangle one another. They form a trine to one another. You've got a planet in each of the three signs of one element. For instance, if you're a Virgo, let's say you had a planet in Virgo, Capricorn, and Taurus. Okay, that would be a grand trine in Earth, right? When it's a yacht, it's an isosceles triangle. Okay, so the sides are even. They're uneven, and they intensify right at the apex, which is you. You're at the apex of this yacht. Okay, so you're going to be feeling during this period of time like someone's trying to communicate something to you, and you're not getting it. Okay, you're just not getting it, and so there can be a growing frustration during this period of time, and you can maybe even begin to think, well, are people laughing behind my back? Are they making a point of not communicating, or is it my fault? Am I stupid? Am I not following this? Am I not getting this? Okay, and so this could be a very, very frustrating period for you. Now, nobody likes frustration. I wouldn't want to wish it on anyone, and nobody likes frustration. And sometimes we're told that frustration can be good. I don't know if frustration can be good. I hate being frustrated. I'll share that with you right away. What I know is not good with frustration is quitting the energy. You're frustrated, and so then throwing up your hands or giving up, or I'm not going to deal with this, it's just too frustrating. Okay, that's not a good thing, because you kind of carry the energy with you as you depart the situation, right? And at the same time, it can also be argued, well, if you're frustrated with getting the answer to the math problem, and you keep doing it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and you keep making the mistakes over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, what's the point of continuing like that? Isn't it a better idea to take a break or see what it looks like in the morning, when you're not wound up doing the same thing over and over and over again? And the answer is, yeah, that is good. But taking a break doesn't mean that you quit the situation. Taking a break is that you're calling a timeout. Okay, so you can just sort of remove for a bit, unwind, maybe tell the other people you're taking a time out, not leave them hanging, and just kind of try to figure out what's going on here, and then try again. Okay, so what happens with this quincunx is that you may feel like there's a deep wrinkle going on in your energies right now, that things are not smoothed over, that they're wrinkled, they're frustrated. And the more that you do to try to smooth things out, the more frustrated they get. But yet at the same time, there's this urgency on you. There's this insistence on you that you're almost like on the edge of a breakthrough, but you can't tell if it's a breakthrough or a breakdown, and you're still not getting it, and you're angry at yourself for not getting it, and that sort of a thing. So if any of that makes any sort of sense to you, A, welcome to a yacht, okay, and B, what's supposed to be the good thing about this experience? Okay, you're not supposed to quit it, but you're not supposed to drive yourself into the ground as a result of it either. What this is about is that these planets are legitimately trying to communicate to you. They're trying to show you the way. And what it is that you might start to get it and then you shut down, or you might start to get somewhere and then you hit up against a wall. And then you get so involved in that you stopped listening to how the planets are trying to show you the way. Now, because of the sextile nature, they're trying to show you another way. Okay, they're trying to show you maybe what you're doing right here by repeating something over and over again isn't the best idea. Maybe you want to try another approach. Maybe you want to try it from a different angle. Maybe you want to sort of change your thinking cap and put on a different one. Okay, that instead of logical intelligence, let's try, I don't know, emotional intelligence. Okay, something along those lines. They're trying to appeal to you to try to find another way. They're not deliberately trying to withhold something from you. They're just as frustrated, but they're not at the apex of an isosceles triangle like you are. Okay, they're not feeling under the gun like you are. In fact, Saturn and Pluto are sextiling one another. So they're like, wow, Virgo's really not getting it. So let's try it from this angle. You know, they're trying something else. They want you to win, but you guys aren't getting each other. But you can get each other by entering into the experimental spirit of Aquarius and the innovative spirit of Aries. Okay, try different approaches. When you find yourself getting caught up in the frustration, take a break, you know, and then try again later or at another time. Talk to someone else about something, you know, say to someone who's like, well, it's easy. It's like this. Just like, no, don't tell me it's easy. It's like this. Talk to me like I'm stupid. Okay. Like walk me through this step by step. And the person might be like, you're not stupid, but you're like step by step. And they're like, okay, you know, and maybe the person in walking you step by step begins to recognize this isn't easy information to get. And like, wow, I'm really sorry that I was being so like glib about this. This is really not an easy thing to understand, or the problem that you're dealing with here is indeed complicated, more complicated than I thought it was to begin with. Okay, so this may create an appreciation for other people of what you're struggling with, or an appreciation that they're not being the best at communicating, and so they're going to try a different way. So during the period of time of the sextile, there is the promise of working through this, that there will be a breakthrough, that you will get it. But it's also questioning that maybe it's not just your approach that should be revisited, but maybe even your destination, like where you want to go with something. Maybe your approach is right and your destination isn't, you know, that sort of thing. So it's not leaving things open-ended to questions and like, we're going to have open-ended questions. It's like playing around with the questions. Like, is my approach off? Let's try something different. Or maybe my approach is off because maybe this isn't what I really want, or the destination that I want to go towards in the first place. So it's this reworking of things, not smoothing out the wrinkle, letting the wrinkle be the wrinkle. Quincunxes and yods are all about a work in progress, and they're all about process rather than result. So what you might find as a result of all of this, you know, is that, you know, the experience goes from being a very frustrating or even dismaying one to one in which it forces you to really sort of rethink different things. And you go from that frustration to experiencing something that's much more enlightening and liberating. If you're born under Libra, or you have Libra rising, then you are currently dealing with Saturn traveling through your opposite sign of Aries. When Saturn is opposite you in the sky, it becomes a withholding energy, okay? It's something that you want to be there is made unavailable. And the more that you strive after it, or you want it to come to you or to be available, the more distant it becomes, the more it withdraws, the more that it withholds, until you start to feel like you're involved in an exercise in futility and you want to throw up your hands and say, you know, clearly this isn't meant to happen, so I'm just going to give up on this. Okay, oppositions feel no great impulse to cooperate with you. Okay, they are absolutely opposite you on the zodiacal wheel. They're 180 degrees away, and they see no need to come over to your corner or for you to come over to their corner. You know, a way to think of it is, okay, think of the North and South Pole. Okay, they're both polar, you know, they're both cold, and they're both remote, but they are on opposite ends of the Earth from one another. And this is displayed, even though they both might have ice and snow, but this is displayed by the fact that you see polar bears in the North Pole, but you would never see them in the South Pole. And you see penguins in the South Pole, and you would never see them in the North Pole. Okay, so even their denizens, their native habitat is different. Okay, so So this is what I sort of want to communicate by the idea of polar opposite. It's a great distance. A planet opposite you is at a great distance. And then if it's something like Saturn, it's withholding or maintaining that distance. And so this might be experienced as a pall over your relationships. If you're in a relationship right now, you might feel very distant in it, or that you're both on parallel tracks, but you're not really on the same track with one another at all. Or another thing that you might be experiencing is a frustration with forming relationships right now, that, maybe you meet someone and you laugh and you share the same humor and you talk about your life ambitions and dreams. And those are things that you have in common as well. And then when you're supposed to get together again, this person ghosts you or disappears from view. So you can really feel kind of like, wow, things are like really off, or it's worse than off. Things are just like really uncooperative. It's like, I want to form a relationship, it's not happening, or I want to feel more intimate in my relationship, it's not happening, or maybe I just should give up on relationships altogether. The wonderful thing about Pluto being in the zodiac sign of Aquarius is that it breaks up that opposition energy, and the opposition energy basically means that the two planets are, crossed arms with backs to one another, not talking to each other. Okay. So when we have Pluto in Aquarius, Aquarius is an air sign, just like Libra. Okay. So that forms a trine. That means that Pluto is here at your service. It's in Aquarius. It's here to help you be the best Libra that you can be. All right. And so Pluto at the same time is forming a sextile to Saturn in Aries. Aries is a fire sign. Aquarius is an air sign. And the two of them are harmonious. They're complementary. They get one another and they become conversational. Now, because Pluto rules over the things that are buried under the surface, they're not seen, they're not visible. It's named after the Roman god of the underworld, for goodness sakes. Like we can admire a tree, but rarely do we look at its roots unless it's been knocked over or there's been earth erosion or something along those lines. We look at the tree and we admire it. We don't really think about what's underneath it, unless you're an arborist or something, I guess. But anyway, for most of us, we admire the tree. All right. So that's what's going on. And so what you might do when there's a planet like Saturn opposite you is that you might accept things at face value, like, trying to set up a relationship or feel comfortable in a relationship or feel like I'm with the right person. That's just not happening for me right now. And so maybe I should give up. Maybe I should just go back to, doing things my own way and just not even try this. It just seems like an exercise in futility. Pluto appears here as a mediating figure, really as a translator. Okay. And what might be happening here is that you don't understand why this is happening. Let's say you met someone and you shared the same jokes and you had the same life aspirations and things like that, and the person didn't show up the following day and you feel rejected and bad. Well, you might not know what's going on in that person's life. Maybe that person was called away to some sort of responsibility or obligation, or maybe what that person took away from your encounter was really special to that person. They really loved it, but it wasn't interpreted in the same way that it was interpreted by you. So Pluto here by trine helps us to understand what's really going on. Okay, it's funny. Pluto is a planet that will cover over or keep secret the things that need to be kept secret. And usually they're kept secret for a reason. Okay, like if you are like, well, if trees has roots, let's like dig away the earth and show the roots too. Well, those roots aren't going to be able to exist if they're not underground. Okay, they're going to dry up and shrivel. Okay, they want to be underground. Okay, so Pluto guards that. It has great respect for that. But when it's in a trine, it's more willing to divulge, might be the better way of putting it. This is a time when you can get your answers, or you can get a fuller understanding of what's going on. And that might appear in conversation. If you're feeling distant from someone, this might be a period of time when they turn to you and they're like, you know what, I've been really distant lately and I want to tell you why. Okay. And it could come out like that. Or you discover the reasons that were behind this person not being available in some way. And maybe they don't satisfy you, but at least you have the reasons, you know the reasons, and that's better than being kept guessing. So this is something that can this is a particular sextile that can either lay things to rest, okay, between you and someone else, that at last you can be like, okay, now I understand what happened. I don't like it. I don't agree with it, but I understand. So that's closure. So I can lay that to rest. Or it might be, wow, I had no idea that this is what was going on. This person's really a mess. I'm better off like without the, and like you might feel really good about that decision. Or you might be like, wow, now I understand what's going on. And I feel really bad for this person. And I want to be there for them, in some sort of like Jane Eyre type of way or something along those lines. But, it's like, it creates an understanding that either allows you to bring things to a close, or if you want to remain in a relationship, or if you want to pursue a relationship, you would be doing it knowing what you're getting into, knowing what the obstacles are, knowing what the conditions are. And I would imagine that would take place because you have strong feeling for the person has strong feeling for you back, and you both ultimately may be working to get through that problem or issue. But that would be based on both of you making that decision together rather than apart. So the beauty of Pluto is that it's finally going to reveal and divulge a position of someone else in your life that you really didn't understand, why you were off on the wrong foot, or why you weren't clicking or getting closer or anything like that. And that may give you closure, or it may provide you with the information you needed to know to decide if you want to stay in that association, friendship, or relationship, or if you want to bring things to a close. If you're born under Scorpio, or you have Scorpio rising, you can already tell that things are changing on a fundamental level, okay? And what I mean by fundamental level is like a deep down level. You can sense that there's a change. You can sense that there's a shift and that things are going to be different. Now, this isn't the same idea as Uranus, okay? Uranus is a modern planet just like Pluto is. And Uranus can bring radical changes that come in out of the blue, and they totally change the direction that your life is going in. And the nature of those changes can be both critical and abrupt. But when we're talking about Pluto, the changes are really sort of glacial in their speed. They're very slow. They're not overnight, they're not sudden, they're not quick. But because Pluto is one of your ruling planets, you have two, Pluto and Mars, because Pluto is one of your ruling planets and it's at the base of your solar horoscope, you can tell that things are shifting. You could tell that something's different. Okay. Now, for most people, that would be like, I need to find out what's different, like I need to know what's different. And this is alarming, or what's different, or what's going to change? Is my relationship going to change? Do I have to pick up and move and leave my house? Is my job changing? It can become anxiety provoking, this idea of a change. Because Pluto's your ruling planet and you're also a Scorpio, when you feel like something is shifting or changing, which is actually rare, all right, there's a natural trust that you have in it. All right. You trust that this is right, that it's pointing you in a good direction. All right. And that might be as far as you take it. The beauty about water signs is that they have patience with things like this. I mean, they can get annoyed and frustrated like everyone else, and Scorpio maybe more so than the other two water signs because of your Mars rulership. But when you feel that something is taking place on a fundamental deep level, then you know that that's right. And the rightness of that feeling is what tells you to leave it alone and to respect it and to let it be. All right. So, you might not be totally on board with this, you might not be totally trusting, but you know that it's taking place for a reason and that it's right. All right. The other planet that's taking place here is the Saturn in Aries. And Saturn in Aries is taking place in that part of your solar horoscope that has to do with work, health, and service. Okay. It's basically your daily work in your life, and it's also the daily maintenance of your body, which allows you to work and provide service and things along those lines. And this is a sextile that's taking place between the two planetary energies. So you might have right now changes going on in your diet or changes going on in your health regimen. You know, you might be changing the way that you exercise, or you might be changing the way that you take care of your body or physical health, along with maybe your emotional health. But another thing that we're going to see here, where that Pluto at the base of your chart can be untranslatable, you know, it's not speaking, it's just a feeling, and you know that that feeling is right. The Saturn in Aries is going to say, okay, I respect that there's a fundamental change or a shift, and we're going to let that feeling be. But what are we going to do with it? Okay, we have to still function in our life. We still have to get things done. Like, are we going to be here long enough that I can finish the things that I need to finish, or are we moving to another state? So I might as well not start a project. Like, where are we with this fundamental feeling of change? Okay. And so the Saturn is going to be more like, what do I do with this? It wants to be more practical. It wants to be more applying. And that will come through. For goodness sake, you should continue, you know, doing the things that you're doing or whatever. But you may be feeling in your life right now sort of a drop in enthusiasm, or maybe even a drop in commitment, because it's been replaced by an anticipation or an expectation of something different. So until that appears or until that emerges, you need to be continuing with your life as is, and to really focus on that, and to trust that your ruling planet Pluto will make known what needs to be known when you need to know it. And that will probably be within about the next probably 6 months or so. Another thing that you might be facing in your life is this feeling that nothing really feels like it's taking off. All right. That try as you may to launch something or to get something up and going, like it's just not taking place. All right. And so what needs to happen with this is that you may be feeling like this is a time when you need to go back to the drawing board. Okay. If you're working on a project or a venture, maybe this is a time where you go back to the drawing board, you get rid of 95% of what you put together and you begin with 5%, you know, and you might be feeling like, I can't do that. I don't have the time to do it, or I invested all this energy in this, or this has to work through for me. But the indication here with the Saturn at this particular angle is that you need to go back to the drawing board, that if things aren't coming together in the way that you want them together, there's a reason. And it's probably because they're not aligning right. You're forcing a fit. Okay. Or you could do better, actually. That might be another idea that's going on here. So whatever the impulse of going back to the drawing board, if you're feeling that right now, do it. You know, do it instead of insisting that you keep going the way that you're going. Even if it feels like a failure, you don't have the time to do it, just go back to the drawing board. Because what's going on here, you know how I talked about how Saturn is trying to figure out how to apply that Plutonian energy? There's a flip side to that. Saturn is also trying to connect to your purpose, to what you're really about. And we don't always get an opportunity to connect to what we want to do and what we're really about on this fundamental level. And this period of time of the Saturn sextiling the Pluto, it's in a place where it can communicate that. And I think what's being communicated is really two questions. Do you really want to be doing what you're doing? And is it really what you're about? And instead of sort of reaching around to find something else, just sort of like let those questions linger there. Go back to that drawing board, do rough sketches either on paper or in your head, you know, and this period of time could become a period of time where you really connect to what you're about and what you want. And this is going to help you to understand, I think articulate is probably the word that I'm looking for, articulate what this feeling of a fundamental shift, it's going to help you to articulate that over the next 6 to maybe perhaps 8 months. If you're born under Sagittarius or you have Sagittarius rising, this sextile that's taking place between Saturn in Aries and Pluto in Aquarius is going to be a wonderful one for you. And the reason why it's going to be a wonderful one for you is that we're dealing with 2 zodiac signs that complement yours. One is an actual complement. It sextiles yours. So that's the Pluto in Aquarius. That's an air sign, and air forms a natural sextile to fire signs. And the other one, which is the Saturn in Aries, forms a trine to your zodiac sign. And so that's a wonderful energy. This is what we call the simpatico energy in astrology. Trine will draw you out of yourself. It makes you feel more comfortable. It makes you feel supported in the things that you do. It makes you feel like you're on the right track. And when you've got a very strong trine like you have going on right now with that Saturn, you are on the right track. But the thing to keep in mind is that we're still dealing with Saturn, even if it's trining you. So Saturn, because of the trine to you by sign and it's sextile to Pluto, which sextiles you, even though Saturn has changed its disposition towards you, it's not severe and off-putting or disciplinarian or remote. It's very becoming, it's very warm, it's very supportive, it wants the best for you. Saturn hasn't changed its character. So things don't come easily under Saturn, but if you commit yourself to an enterprise or to a venture or to an endeavor, you will get rewards, you will get results for it. You might be plagued with doubts and fears and insecurities every step of the way, but there's a rightness to it, which is the trine. Okay, a trine is almost kind of like this path opening up where there wasn't a path before, and so it gets you from one point to another. Trines can be like bridge energy. Trines can also be like, I don't know, Moses and parting the Red Sea, like it's looking bad for the Israelites there, with the Egyptian armies closing in on them. And, Moses opens up his arms and the Red Sea is part, and there's a path where there wasn't a path before. So trines can do that as well. But as I said, it can change the disposition of Saturn. It can make Saturn more benevolent, but it does not change the character of Saturn. And Saturn is still a testing type of planet. And it tests to see if you really want it. And it tests to see if what you want is worth it. Okay, and so these might be the things that are uppermost in mind right now for you. Saturn occupies a part of your solar horoscope that basically pertains to joys, to arts and entertainment, to love and romance, and children. Okay, so it's a bit of a, grab bag there. Basically, it's the 5th house, the solar 5th house in your case, is the house of pleasures, and it's the house of joys, which makes perfect sense because Venus, if she's in the 5th house in an astrological chart, rejoices in that house. Okay, she enjoys being there, and she brings all sorts of Venusian things. So you may have Venusian experiences, even though we're not talking about Venus right now, that are taking place. You may have romance in your life. You may have the delight of children in your life. You may have a creative or an athletic career or experience or success or something along those lines. Something that you have to really commit yourself to, and return to again and again and again as you get better and better and better at it. Now, let's say that this is a romantic relationship that might be starting out or is even going on. When you have Saturn in this position, there might be a significant age difference in this relationship. The person might be significantly older than you, maybe 7 years, maybe 14. I don't know. Saturn rules over cycles of 7. Or the person might be significantly younger than you. They might be 7 years younger than you or 14 years younger than you. I mean, you get age difference whenever you're dealing with Saturn in a sort of 5th house position like that. And so this might be something that's bringing you a lot of joy, this romantic relationship or pairing in your life, or maybe it's a creative collaboration. But at the same time, you might be wondering, is this wise? Is the person too old? Is the person too young? Is this like, a wise thing to do? You might have your own issues about relationships coming up right now. Sagittarians can get a little restless around the idea of needs and expectations in a relationship. Okay. On one hand, they can be like, don't depend on me. But then on the other hand, they want someone to depend on them. It's a mutable sign. So it's 1 foot in, 1 foot out, type of thing. All the mutable signs deal with this, even Virgo. So there's this idea of that's going on. But what's nice is that Pluto is sextiling the Saturn that trines your sign. And then that Pluto is also sextiling you as well. So let's say, I don't know, let's say you met someone and you were like, oh my goodness, how can I ever introduce this person to my friends and colleagues? Okay, this would be a period of time in which your friends and colleagues are like, oh my God, this person's great. I see totally why the two of you are going out. You're a perfect match. Okay, and you might be like, oh, emboldened or encouraged by that, or this might be a period of time in which you've always been dissed by the friends and family of someone that you felt close to. And this might be a period of time where all of a sudden they're changing their relationship to you. They're changing what they think about you. They're changing the way that they behave around you. And this might be a time in which you feel ready for a serious relationship or ready to commit to creative collaboration. Not that you haven't been before, but maybe you've been 1 foot in, 1 foot out before, or making excuses before, or saying, oh, we'll get around to it. But right now with the Saturn trine and the Pluto sextiling, there's a real commitment, okay? So sometimes Sagittarians can have this sort of knee-jerk reaction whenever they feel like their freedom is being curbed. And freedom can be curbed because a person made another date with you, and it could be like, oh no, my freedom is being curbed. Or freedom can be curbed because you feel like there's an expectation of you or an obligation that's been placed on you. And Sagittarians can be restless just like horses can get restless. Your sign needs a lot of reassurance, okay? And your sign needs a lot of just hanging out, okay? Sagittarians, even though they'll come across as wanting to talk through things about relationship or whatever, what they really want is the physical reassurance and the sort of just hanging out together reassurance. I mean, they can talk philosophically, but they might not really want those answers. They just want, like, is this fun? Is this light? Is this enjoyable? Is this comfortable? And right now you may be feeling those things. Now, there might be a little bit more of a weightier concern to it. We do have Saturn there. So there might be something that's going on in this person's life or your life, that you could use support and a friend and someone helping you out with. Or it might be that in a collaboration, you're starting to get more serious, more disciplined. And when you become more serious and disciplined, more is at stake. It matters more, and you might have been dancing around how much you were going to invest in that, personally, and you might find yourself getting fully invested in it. And you might be like, let's do this. Let's commit to this. So this might be something in which you're ready to do it, that the circumstances are such that they're conducive to this, that you're feeling solid. Not like you're like, I hope it works out, but like, I know this is right. Okay. And if that's what's going on, this is the sextile at work. So the planets are definitely saying proceed in these solar fifth house affairs and concerns, proceed in anything dealing with arts and entertainment or love or romance or children or delights. Proceed in those things because you are feeling the delight, but you're feeling the delight and the joy. There's no but. You're feeling absolutely delight and joy and fulfillment. But at the same time, you can handle the expectations or whatever pressure may be coming with that as well. You're not going to feel like, oh no, I'm going to get cold feet. It's more like you're comfortable with all of this and you're comfortable in taking the next step forward. And taking the next step forward is always something that someone born under Sagittarius or has Sagittarius rising is interested in. If you're born under Capricorn or you have Capricorn rising, you can tell that a chapter has come to an end. It's not coming to an end. It's already come to an end. Now, some of that might be explained by the fact that, Pluto finally left your sign, but actually that's been like a year ago. All right. So I don't think it's altogether that. I think it's more along the lines of Saturn entering the solar fourth house of your solar horoscope. Now, the solar fourth house is a fascinating house to me. It's a very complex one and a very nuanced one, to be honest. It's at the base of the chart. If you're thinking of a tree, the solar 10th house is the crown of the tree. It's the leaves. If you're thinking of a clock, it's 12 noon, And then the base of the chart, which is called the IC, which is basically Imam Kuli, which means bottom of the sky. The base of the chart are the roots of the tree, its foundation, where it holds its place. And this is why the fourth house has always been associated to hearth and home and family, roots, literally. Why it's also been connected to the figure of the father. That sometimes throws people. They're like, wait, I thought that was the mother. It's actually the father in more traditional astrology, because you carry the father's surname from generation to generation, or property was passed down through the father's line rather than the mother's line. That's just an ode there to 2,500 plus years of Western astrology. Okay, things might change right now in your life, but that's basically why the father was connected with that particular house. The other thing that the fourth house is known for is the house of endings, all right? And sometimes that sends a chill up people's spines. They're like, ending, what's ending, And what it comes from is, think of midnight. Okay, that's the position of the fourth house in a solar horoscope. It's midnight. And the sun at midnight, okay, will cross from one day into the next day. Okay, so we don't change days. We don't go from, January 15th to 16th at sunrise. We go from January 15th to 16th when the sun changes over at midnight. So this is why the fourth house has always been associated to endings or the end of the matter. And what this means is that you've brought one day to a close and another day is beginning. Okay. And so what's going on here is this feeling like a chapter of your life has come to a close and another chapter of your life is beginning. Now, the book analogy works as far as one chapter coming to an end and another one beginning. Okay, that works. But where it doesn't work is that when we end one chapter and begin another one, we start reading. This is more like you end a chapter and you turn off your Kindle or you close your book and you've gone to do something else. Okay, the chapter ends, but you don't know what the next chapter is because the sun at the base of the chart hasn't risen to the position of dawn or sunrise. It hasn't illuminated. It hasn't shown what it is yet. So what you can have here is this feeling like a chapter in my life has come to an end. It's come to a close. That might be connected to home or hearth or family. There might be a change. There might be a change in your family in which you're missing someone, or there might be a change in your family where you're adding someone. Okay, it's a fundamental change in the family makeup. But with this sense of an ending, there isn't really a feeling like you see it, okay, yet, or you don't really know where it's going to go. You're still in the dark because it's still night when the sun changes signs at midnight. Now, what's helpful here is the Pluto, which appears in the zodiac sign of Aquarius. So Saturn is at the base of the chart in Aries, and that's a fire sign. And so it forms a natural sextile to Pluto and Aquarius in your solar house of finances. And so this is potentially a wonderful placement for Pluto. It's potentially a wonderful placement for Pluto because Pluto is the god of riches in Roman mythology. Pluto, named after the Roman god of the underworld, ruled over things like buried bodies and seeds, but it also ruled over things like buried treasure and precious metals and oil, things buried in the earth. And also we get our word plutocracy, which means the moneyed class from Pluto, the etymological root of that word is Pluto, which means wealth. So I'm not saying you're going to be suddenly wealthy. Okay. We're not talking Jupiter and winning the lottery here. Okay. What I'm saying is that you're on your way to creating that in your life. Now, this might be the first time that you're creating that, or this might be round number 7 or 15. But what the planets are indicating is that you're on your way to creating that this is going to be sustained and that this is going to be substantial. Remember that Saturn, before Pluto was discovered in 1930, was the planet of mines. You dig down in the earth to bring up the precious metals. So it was the planet of mines and as I said, buried treasure. So things that are under the surface. So here is this feeling like something has changed for you. Something's come to a close and you're starting something new. And it's going to feel more like it's yours. Okay. It's not going to feel like it's someone else. So this might manifest as you working for yourself instead of working for someone else, or you may be owning a company or storefront or something instead of working for someone else. But this is your business. This is your stuff. Pluto is in your solar house of finances. Okay. And what you may also be experiencing in your life is an influx of people coming into your life. Now, it's not like suddenly like, here's the party, like they all showed up at your apartment in Greenwich Village, New York. And it's like, here's the party. It's not that. It's more like you might be meeting people professionally or meeting people who have need of your services or meeting people who are compatriots who are working alongside you. This is the Pluto and Aquarius. This is the people element. Aquarius is a people sign. Right now, your finances are going to be linked to people. This isn't about solitary work. This is about you communicating and relating to people in some way. That's more than transactional. Okay. It's not Gemini here on the second house. It's Aquarius. And this is your way of kind of making the world a better place. So what you're doing right now financially, your finances might be connected to making the world a better place. Maybe you're funding movements that, promise to make the planet a better place, or maybe you're working with different types of people in a more, what would be called a progressive way. But there may be a very real commitment to making the world a better place, that this is important for you. This isn't typically Capricorn, by the way. Capricorn is usually more about how can I secure myself and establish myself, and the fear of money scarcity because you're a winter sign. But when you're dealing with Pluto and Aquarius, it takes on that more what I was referring to utopian type of energy. And you realizing that it's not becoming rich at someone else's expense or, a money grab or anything like that, that we live in a world where there's more than enough to go around, and we need to sort of take on a cultivating attitude about life with other people. And that might sound a little highfalutin for you as a Capricorn, but I will bet you anything that it shows up in the culture of your workspace. It shows up in your exchanges with people that you have business that you're dealing with, that it's more than just, as I said, transactional. It's really about improving their lives and them improving your life. So really what's going on here with this particular sextile, and it's setting a tone for a number of years, is that this is less about you climbing higher, and it's more about you sinking your roots deeper. Okay, so this isn't, your switch is going to change from like ambitious, got to get ahead, got to climb up on top of that. Okay, it's going to switch from that and more to sinking your roots down into the earth and to drinking nourishment, taking in nourishment, and to anchoring yourself and actually taking over more room, taking over more space. Like a tree grows, it grows, wider and bigger and taller. And this is more what I want to communicate to you, so that this next chapter, I think, is going to be less about stress and strife and it's going to be more about ownership and fulfillment. If you're born into Aquarius or you have Aquarius rising, I don't think you can do better than this upcoming Saturn-Pluto sextile that's taking place on March 28th. The reason why is because you have Pluto in your own zodiac sign, okay? And this is Pluto, the planet of ordeals, yes, and transformations that arise from them. Let's not forget that second part. But then you also have Saturn, which is one of your two planetary rulers. You're ruled by Saturn and Uranus. You also have Saturn in Aries, which is forming the sextile to Pluto. So a sextile, which is a positive aspect between two signs of complementary elements, air complements fire, like water complements earth, okay, they just naturally understand one another, is wonderful. It's enlivening, it's engaging, it's stimulating, okay, this sextile between a fire and an air sign. And you get to pull on it because the Pluto is in your Aquarius. So you're bringing your Pluto and Aquariusness, okay, to the table. And the Saturn in Aries is helping you to recognize and understand what's going to be of use to you. Now, with Pluto in Aquarius, and it's in your zodiac sign for a number of years, you're going through a tremendously slow and important change, okay? And I want you to think of those two words, slow and important. Pluto takes the longest time to go through an astrological sign. Pluto can spend anywhere from 12 to 32 years in just one astrological sign. That's how slow its orbit is. And so Pluto will be in your zodiac sign of Aquarius for a chunk of time. So what you're feeling right here is that things are changing on a fundamental level, but it's kind of hard for you to articulate what exactly that is. As an air sign, and particularly an Aquarius, you're going to be forward looking, okay? You look to the future. You expect to figure things out and to become enlightened about the things that you should become enlightened about as you move towards the future. All right. So you're not really comfortable with this idea of being in the dark or not having a plan. Right now, you can feel the excitement of change. Right now, you probably want to do things very differently in your life, or you want to live a very different life than the one that you're living right now. And it's not just want to live a different life. It's more like you have to. We have to always remember that there's a sort of obsessive, compulsive element to Pluto. And you may be feeling right now like, okay, I need to be heading in a new direction in my life. I feel it in my bones. And people might be looking at you saying like, well, why do you need to move in a different direction? And you might just be like, I have to. And it's like, well, that's not like you, Aquarius. You usually explain it. And you're like, I don't know how to explain it. I just know that I have to. And then might be like, what? Okay, so you're driven by this, like, I'm moving in a different direction. This is Pluto in your sign. This is also the eclipses traveling through your sign, whether it's a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse. So there's that sense of moving in a different direction, but not being clear on what it is. But there's also a sense of the inevitability of it. And you're not making it up in your head. That's real. You are moving in a direction that's different, and it is inevitable, even though it's impossible to explain, or trying to explain it right now, it just doesn't click with you. Now, part of what comes out of this can be a sense of disengagement in your life, this feeling or sense that things are over before they are. And so this can make you feel very sort of distant or remote or even over something. And that's not a great thing for an Aquarius or an Aquarius rising to be feeling. You guys already deal with bird's eye views of life. Okay, you're very high in the sky. Actually, we might want to change that from a bird's eye view to a satellite's view. Anyway, you guys like can be very removed in your apartness from things. So feeling apart from people or like something's over isn't a good idea, because that brings about a sort of isolated quality, which isn't a good part of Aquarius. I'm not saying that you have to be on and social all the time. You like to be isolated or withdrawn. That replenishes, refreshes, and restores you. But too much of that, and you kind of get too removed from things. The beauty about Aquarius is that satellite's view of things. Okay, you can take in the big picture. You can see things in the abstract. You're not overly tied to a moment. Okay, you can see patterns of history. All right, you're not going to say like, oh, we're coming to an end tomorrow, this is awful. You'll be like, oh, things come in waves or things come in phases, and there's a pattern here, and we're going through this pattern right now, and we'll emerge and go through another pattern. I mean, you can see and understand these things, but sometimes, as I said before, they can be a little too distant. They can be a little too remote. The wonderful thing about your ruling planet Saturn being in the zodiac sign of Aries, which is the sign of individuality, it's a person. If you think of Aquarius as being the group or society, collective, I think, is the word that a lot of people use with Aquarius. Aries is absolutely individual. Okay, Aries places a great deal of value on I make a difference. What I say matters. My opinion is important. And what we add to that when we're talking particularly about Aries is an urgency. Okay, what I say matters and you need to hear it now, or I have an opinion and this is going to change everything, so you need to hear it now. Or I need to express myself now. So there's an urgency to Aries because of its fiery nature. And what it does when we have Saturn forming a sextile to the Pluto is it brings you into the present moment in a way that you might not be typically. In other words, if it's kind of the nature of Aquarius to become more a satellite's view of the world, big picture and remote, maybe even abstract, the Saturn in Aries reminds you of the present moment. It reminds you of the urgency. And so that keeps you connected to people. That keeps you connected to what's going on in your life. That allows you to say, I may be moving on, but I haven't moved on yet. My present moment is still with these friends. My present moment is still with the situation. My present moment is still, I'm saving up money to go and live in France. Okay. And so it's that Saturn in Aries that anchors you in the present moment. What's good about that is because it's in present moments that we see our opportunities. It's in present moments that we see our options. It's in present moment that we see how this could go one way, but maybe we'll want to try playing it a different way. Okay, this allows us to orient ourselves in the here and now so that the here and now isn't something that you've moved past or you're over or will be just a speck in history. Okay, the here and now is engaging, it's enlivening, it's full of possibility, and it's up to you to seize those possibilities. That phrase, carpe diem, seize the day. Okay, it's about seizing the day. It's not seizing the future, or seizing the past or seizing the sky view of everything. It's seizing the day, not a day or tomorrow or yesterday, the day, the present moment. And so this is what the Saturn in Aries allows you to do. And so what it can help you to do is to hear what people are saying about where you're going. You might have an idea of like, I'm moving on, I want to try different things. What is it? This would be a good time to talk to people about it, whom you trust or rely on. And they might shoot down your idea, but chances are they're going to support it. We're talking about a sextile here. And not only are you going to get support, but you might actually get very real and useful information. Oh, that's such a great idea. You want to call Lynn about that, or you want to contact Hortense about that. She knows everything there is to know about this thing that you're curious about. We might call it networking, but because of the nature of the Saturn and Aries, it's more like one person, and then you talk to another person, okay? And they might not even be connected at this point. They might even be standalones. But what it's about is gathering information and beginning to articulate where you feel like you're going in your life. You are growing into yourself, even now as we speak. You could be 18 years old listening to this, or you could be 73 listening to this, but there's a feeling of growing into yourself at this point, that you're becoming more and more who you were always meant to be. So this is a very powerful and a pivotal time for you. And to be surrounded by people who support that and have ideas of what you could do and what that might mean, this is wonderful. Because even though Aquarians can tend to be a little bit aloof or a little bit apart, you're still an air sign. And air signs, at the end of the day, want to be surrounded by a company of people that they enjoy, that they find fascinating, and that they also find very illuminating. If you're born under Pisces or you have Pisces rising, this Pluto-Saturn sextile is going to be an interesting one for you. Now, at first, you might not really understand what it's about. And that's because you're a water sign, and these two planets happen to be in air and fire signs. And air and fire is a very different element than water. Water is more of a yin element, what we might call a feminine element. It's very much about sensing things, being sensitive to things. There's a prescience. There's an unspoken understanding to water. And there's also fluidity to water. You know, water can go through a period of time in which it's going to be frozen, and then the seasons change, and that ice melts, and it becomes free-flowing water again. So water has no trouble, no problem with being frozen in place and then being fluid again, just like water can evaporate and disappear, form as clouds in the sky, and then reappear as rain. So that kind of fluidity and going with the flow of things is very watery, and it can also be very yin in that regard. Now, air and fire are very yang. Okay, they're very masculine, and so they're more active and activating. They can also be more in a hurry, and they can be more restless, and they can be more provocative than you feel comfortable with, They want to get on with something that's new and different. And as a Pisces, you're open to new, not sure you're open to different. You could kind of be open to different, but as long as it goes in a fluid way, then you're good with it. If it's something that's too abrupt, if it's something that's too sudden, then you go into shock. You just cannot deal with it. If you can see the continuity, if you can see the fluidity, then this is a good thing. Now, what's happening here with the energies, the interaction of these elements with you, is that they're pushing you towards something more fiery and airy, something new and different. And you're not sure if you want to go with that because it seems too abrupt, and it seems maybe even too quick for you, too quick, too fast for you. And so the idea that I want you to keep in mind, especially when we talk about your finances, is this idea of repotting. Okay, I don't know if you keep house plants or if you know anyone who does. And this can also take place with, container gardens. You can have a plant and it's in a pot, and it reaches a point in which needs to be repotted. Now that means either that you have to dig the plant up out of its pot and put it into a larger one, or maybe it needs repotted because it needs to be repotted because the soil's just gotten really old and used up and needs to be taken out of the pot. It needs a whole bunch of fresh soil and be put back into that. So what's going on here in your life is this energy of repotting. Okay, your instinct to it, your reaction to it rather, might be these changes are too sudden, they're too quick, they're too much. I don't know if I want to do that, and all mutable signs are ambivalent about taking an action. Sometimes they're for it, sometimes they're not, and oftentimes at the same time. But mutable signs like Pisces, Gemini, Virgo, yes, Virgo, and Sagittarius kind of have one foot in and one foot out. So just, so that they're nursing their prerogative or choice or exit plan. So with this repotting energy, what you might find is that it's time to move to a larger space. Now, that could be physically true in your life. It's time for you to move to a larger space for you to inhabit. That might be an apartment or a home or a residence. But it might also indicate that your finances need to be repotted, that they've either been left to languish for a period of time without much oversight, and maybe they've sort of grown gnarly, or maybe that you've practiced a certain sort of financial regimen. Maybe it's a budgeting plan or a business plan, and it's gone as far as it can go. It's actually, instead of it, nurturing, it's become too confining. It's the roots are balling up. And so, just to work with this metaphor, what you want to do with repotting is that you dig up the plant and you massage the root ball. Okay. You get it comfortable. You get it feeling the love and the nurturing again as you massage and maybe run your fingers through the roots and let the soil fall out. And it's kind of your way of reconnecting to it again. And then you place it into a new pot that's a little bit bigger, not hugely bigger, but a little bit bigger. So you might be involved right now in negotiations with your finances, or even guidance with your finances to move them into a different venue that might be a larger or bigger one, or to simply be doing more with your finances than you have been doing with them, or to maybe just give them more room. And that just doesn't have to be money in the bank or your stocks or anything like that. That can be your business. Maybe you think of it expanding in some way, either expanding what you do in some way, or maybe even expanding your business space in some way. But the energy here isn't innovative in something like completely new and different and like, isn't this exciting? It's more organic and it's more transitional. I love that idea of like rubbing the root ball. It just, you want to get to know your finances again and just sort of coax them and reassure them. And by doing that, you coax and reassure yourself, so that when you place them in a larger pot, maybe you've moved around an investment, or you're investing in a bigger space, you might be paying more money for it, something along those lines. You want to give yourself time to adapt. It's just like when a plant is being repotted, it needs time to adapt. I mean, right away you might water it, but then after a while you don't water it as much. It needs time to sort of get used to where it is. And sometimes when plants are repotted or transplanted even, they can go into a kind of shock, And so if you've moved into a space or committed to a larger space, you might be like, what was I thinking? Or if you've, changed the format of your finances, you might be like, it's not as much as it was last week. What did I do? I messed everything up. It's just take a breath, take a chill pill, just cool it, just get into that Pisces, vibe place again. Just trust in the current. Okay. Trust in the current that is moving you right now. And you may find really towards the end of maybe June, or maybe even into autumn, you may find that these things are taking, that actually things are starting to flourish in a much better way. And I'm pretty certain that by the end of the year, you'll be very happy with what you've done, and you'll see the new growth that's taking place. And you might be a little eager to go and repot something else, which I would also encourage you to do if that time is right. But definitely I want you to understand the whole transition of a repotting, and to sort of get into it, get your hands into the dirt and the soil of it, massage that root ball. And you'll see that by the end of the year, there's new growth. Things look a lot happier in your life. You feel a lot happier and more comfortable in your life. But in addition to all this, you're also going to feel more confident about making decisions like this, and probably rather eager to go and try it again in 2027.